Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'm on this side, okay? All right. Well, I'd like to start with the slide that says recruit students from valley to valley. So if that's on, then let me just say a little bit about what that means. As Jim mentioned, my job at UTEP in '83 was to recruit students to UTEP. I was the founding director of the Office of New Student Recruitment. That included working with provisional students, students who were going through orientation. And so that was part of my work. And that's in part where I met Jim. Later, I worked with scholarships. So in '84, Dr. Natalicio was appointed to be the director of academics. So she was what is now the vice president of academic affairs. And so as vice president of academic affairs, recruitment reported to her. So this was in the spring of '84. And I went to her shortly after she was appointed, and, she was still in the dean's office. She was the dean of liberal arts part of that. And I asked her, ma'am, I'm your recruiter. I would like to know who you want me to recruit as undergraduate students. And she looked at me and must have thought, well, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you know? But she was a little pensive, and she looked me right in the eye and she said, I want you to recruit from valley to valley, valley to valley. And, to be a recruiter, like in sales, you got to have an ego. You got to walk in the door and you barely fit, right? Because you can do anything you want, right? And so I said, well, that's perfect, ma'am. Now, will you help me a little bit? I want to know which valleys you're referring to. And she looked at me like, you little smart kid, And I said, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go to the Napa Valley. I'm going to have great wine. I'm going to go to the New Mexico Valley from Santa Fe down to Hatch and have all the chili in the world. I had recruited in Phoenix, and I thought, well, I'd watch baseball, go to spring training. I've been down to the valley and, in Ed Couch, and Mission, and Brownsville. And I thought, I'll see the submarines go back and forth on the Rio Grande. I said, I'll have a great time. And then she brought me down to earth, and she said, I want you to recruit from Carnotillo to Tornillo. And I just smiled. I said, well, so much for that wine. Maybe I could sneak up to Chokey's, and have a beer. So my point on this particular slide is that from the very beginning, she had a very clear focus. She understood the role of UTEP in this community. This was in '84. She'd been here since '71 at that point. So she had a good feel for El Paso, and she loved El Paso, as you know. So I wanted to begin my talk there with that comment, that she knew what she was going to do. Excuse me. In 1988, the next slide, please. 1988, UTEP received one of the first, if not the first, National Science Foundation grant. This was called the ARIMI grant, which you see research improvement in minority institutions. And it was like about $4 million. And with that $4 million, we bought that huge microscope there. And the faculty in geology, because geology was the basic department that got this grant, were just overwhelmed. They could not believe that the National Science Foundation would give UTEP, $4 million to buy this super microscope that hardly anybody in the country had. And they were just overwhelmed. First of all, they were surprised and impressed that UTEP would compete at that level to give this grant. And I remember her telling us, okay, now these guys have gotten this supercomputer microscope here, and they need to put it to work. And it's not amongst themselves, but they need to go out and find minority students to work with them, because that's why they got the money. And they're great researchers and they've got great potential, but the student and the potentials of students is what got us the money. So this was in '88. Now, later on, she would become the vice chair of the National Science Foundation, and she would serve 6 years in that role, appointed by two presidents, George W. Bush and President Clinton, to serve a total of 12 years. And our current president, by the way, serves on that National Science Board as well. So this was a big, big step, because at that point, the president felt that UTEP could compete with other universities across the country. And it took us from being the college on the hill to more of a national impact university. And it was one of the first steps. But very closely related to that, next slide, please. The high hopes. So she had this vision that opportunity was the only thing holding back young people and people across this community. She felt that talent was everywhere. What was lacking was the opportunity and the support. Now, you may remember in the late 80s, there was a big, big push across the country about the time that Stand and Deliver came out with a movie with Olmos. And there was this big push to keep kids in school. They were dropping out. And particularly in Latino and Hispanic and American, Mexican descent populations, some schools were reporting 40–50% dropout rate. And so it was, she was just very concerned with that, because she saw the future of our community and our country in the attention that we were giving to young people completing high school. They couldn't get to college if they didn't finish high school. So she developed this concept of high hopes, which was, on the Frank Sinatra song. Everybody knows that too, right? And it's high hopes. So she wanted to instill in young people a higher aspiration, a higher goal, a higher hope. And so we went out for the 75th anniversary and celebrated the ambition and the desire to go to college with 75 schools all over this community. And so we did that, and we did that with first graders. So when we were doing that, it was about the time that Space Odyssey had been released, the movie, the 2001 Space Odyssey. So we came up with the idea that, hey, maybe these kids will need to go to space or something, Maybe they'll live out the 2001 Space Odyssey. And maybe we got to go out and recruit an astronaut. And that was before Danny Oliva surfaced. And I can't take credit for recruiting Danny because he went to a junior college first and then came 1 year afterwards to UTEP. So it all kind of laid out, just this idea of recruiting someone who was going to graduate in 2001 and telling them as first graders that you need to prepare for college. So that was a part of our 75th anniversary. Jim, you were involved in all that time frame and helping us plan and getting support and scholarships for these students that we were recruiting. And so the development office had a big, big role in that. Next slide, please. The 75th anniversary. We wanted to make a big deal out of that. And the 75th anniversary, 89, it was our 75th year. And she wanted to put out a challenge. And so the challenge was, let's raise $50 million for our endowment. And some of the people were asking her, well, why don't you want to just raise money, not necessarily for an endowment, because endowment money you can't spend, right? You have to invest it. You have to hold on to it. She says, it's not about us succeeding now. It's about us succeeding later. So let's endow the money. And a lot of people said, ma'am, you really went too high. You're not going to do this, and we don't want you to fail. And, because the biggest campaign up to then had been about $5 million, which was the YWCA, and they've been successful at $5 million. So how do you go from $5 million in this poor community to $50 million? Well, at the end of the campaign, with pledges and so forth, it ended up being around $53 million. So she really had an impact on our community in investing in ourselves and finding others across Southwest, and the country to invest in us, in our children. So next slide, please. Before I leave that area, when we celebrated, we all wanted to celebrate with this huge gala. And she wanted us, some people wanted us to dress up with tuxes and long dresses and, the whole works to celebrate the big, like a gala, right? And we did some of that, but she reminded us, we are a sausage and beer community. We're a sausage and beer community. Well, and I kept thinking, well, maybe she means chorizo, Chorizo is more like it, But sausage, chorizo, it's the same thing, We're not Paso. And, we're not champagne and caviar. So again, very rooted in a working class university. And, we aren't going to put on airs just because we've been successful. We had to be true to ourselves, which really leads to the next slide, the access and excellence. And you remember her coming to these programs and putting up her slide, and she had the same balance. It was always excellence. We had to have the balance between access and excellence. And one time I asked her, I had the guts, I said, ma'am, do you think we could shift that to access to excellence? And she was very, very adamant. She says, no, right now you have to have the balance, because there's still too many people who feel that a college education is elitist, and you have to be very special, and you have to have all these prerequisites, including funding and including what side of town you lived in and who your friends were. He said, no, we've got to have that balance. We've got to be very good. Nobody wants to hire a college graduate that just barely squeaked by. C average scholarship person or someone who graduates with a C average is going to have a hard time competing for jobs. So they have to be good. We're not going to give away degrees, because that's not going to help a first generation college student. They have to be able to compete. So she wanted us to strike that balance. Next slide, please. So we come to the centennial celebration. And we tried to depict here, thanks to Mari's good research work, a couple of things that I wanted to reference. The first thing I want to reference is that very far right picture, where some of you may know Greg McNichols. He's our Associate Vice President for Facilities. This is a Nova magazine. You remember the Nova magazine, now called the UTEP magazine. The Nova magazine, this was the spring of 2000. So in spring of 2000, before then actually, she had the vision that one day we would close off University Avenue, that we would no longer allow buses and ambulances and fire trucks and speeding and people go back and forth with the crossroads of Hawthorne through the middle of campus. So she challenged Greg when he was hired. Says, Greg, long-term goal, who knows when, how, but we're going to close this campus off. And we're not going to allow traffic through. We're going to grow, and the sidewalks that used to be 5 feet, maybe, need to be 10 feet, because we're going to need more space for students to walk. So she had this vision at about 2000 and before then, I'm sure, of having what we have now, the Centennial Plaza. In 06, in case you're wondering, is when we got the lock-on. The lock-on, sometimes referred to as the Bhutanese temple. I didn't say that, by the way. It's for promoting one religion over another, right? So that cultural artifact, which is the lock-on, which is now in the center of campus, came to us by way of a gift from the people of Bhutan in 06. So she had to find the right place for that lock-on. And a part of her vision was that we would build garages around the perimeter of the campus so that UTEP could grow and that UTEP could close off the center of campus, and the spaces that were on flat surface would become high-rise, and instead of 150, 700 cars parked, instead of maybe 1,000 cars in what used to be the Liberal Arts parking lot and the Fox Fine Arts parking lot now became 1,500 parking spaces in the world's first Bhutanese style parking garage. So this was all a part of her vision. In that vision, you may recall that in the state legislature, when there was a big push for Tier 1 and definitions of Tier 1, and she told us, she said, let's not let the state define who we are. We need to define who we are. So let's set some goals that we can achieve, that we can be proud of, that will really help our community, instead of chasing somebody else's definition of excellence at Tier 1. So he said, let's keep it simple. Let's produce 100 doctoral degrees a year, and let's get to $100 million in research. When she started as the president, we were doing about 5 million in research. 5 million. I can remember Harmon Hosh was the director, and he did a wonderful job of doing that. Then others came in. Now we're doing over 105 million. So, but that was her goal, 100 million in research. And before she retired, we were on the brink of announcing that we had hit our goal. But she felt that it wasn't her place to announce that. So we waited until we had a shift in president, and then it was announced, and we became the $100 million research program that we now have. So those are all a part of the centennial, part of her celebration. About the time that she was thinking about retiring, next slide, please. She used to say in staff meetings, be disruptive, be disruptive. And we all were kind of puzzled by that. She was a linguist, by the way, and you know that probably. So every word for her was very important. So we knew that disruptive meant something to her. She said, okay, by disruptive, I don't mean that you make a fracas about everything, bang on trash cans or whatever. That's not the disruptive I'm thinking. What she wanted us to do is to break our patterns, to break the way we think, and to free ourselves to think differently, to disrupt our normal patterns so that we can think freer and be more. Next slide. That was about 2017, close to when she was thinking that, I'm going to retire sometime. By the way, many of us kept thinking, okay, when we get to 2001, because she was with first graders in 89, by 2001, she'll retire. No. Then we started thinking, internally, we would all kind of say, well, how long are we going to do this? And almost 40 years later, is when the retirement came. We kept thinking when the new building goes up, UGLC, UGLC would be a great time to retire. The parking garage would be a great time. Not that we were wanting to, we just kept thinking, it's like what's the little bunny that sells batteries? Susan. There you go. There you go, Susan. They were thinking about the retirement.
Out of here.
Okay, so since we're having so much fun, let's go to slide number 9. That's the people associated with El Paso and UTEP. We were thinking, when you think about El Paso, what names come to surface? Now I thought about John Phelan up there, but I couldn't remember how John spelled his last name. So I didn't want to make a fool out of myself. So I just said, I'll just mention him, Of course, the original voice of the miners and very dear to UTEP and very dear to us. Yeah, absolutely.
Paso Downtown Lions is not up there.
Who is?
Paso Downtown Lions.
Well, that's right. Well, I wasn't, let me qualify. We thought we were thinking about people as opposed to organizations. The next time you ask me to come speak up with them. So these are some names that come to mind, right? And all of us could come up with other people. Why didn't you put so-and-so in there? Well, but the point I wanted to make with this slide was that I had a friend of the president, someone that met her 20 years ago, when this gentleman, Vicar, I'll use his first name, Vicar, worked for the UT system as the person who does government relations. So his job was to inform the elected officials in Washington of how great the UT system was and how great UTEP was. So they became very close friends. And so he called me asking about the tribute that we're going to have. And, you know, we went on for 20 minutes talking about her and the impact and what he did and what he does now. He's being confirmed, knock on wood, as one of the undersecretaries for the U.S. Department of Commerce. So 20 years later, fast forward, he's in a position to help El Paso. And he told me this story. He said, you know, the first time I was coming to UTEP, I'd heard all these things about UTEP. I'd heard all these things about Dr. Natalicio. And I didn't know what to expect. So the cab driver that picked him up at the airport, you know, said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to UTEP. So what are you going to do? I'm going to meet Dr. Natalicio. And then he went on the whole cab ride about Dr. Natalicio. And, you know, he didn't have all his facts straight. You know, he just knew that she was born here, that she was raised here, and that, you know, this was, which of course she wasn't, you know, St. Louis, UT, Austin. And so the line that this gentleman remembers 20 years later is in Spanish, es de nosotros. She is of ours. She is one of us. So when we have a cab driver pick up, you know, his fare for the evening, coming from the airport, and talks 20 minutes to get from the airport to UTEP about this woman, you know, it made me think about, okay, who do you associate with UTEP and who do you associate with El Paso? And so there are probably people all over the world, certainly in Bhutan, you know, they know about her. They had long tributes to her contributions. So I just thought that was kind of fun, you know, famous people, people that really promote our city and who we are. I think she's on that list. Okay, so where are we today? Next slide, please. Today, and I gave you the strategic plan. I think we have a terrific, very ambitious strategic plan. And I tell our staff and anybody else that will listen, if I were 20 years old and getting my degree, and maybe 25 and having my degree to quote work, and I was still in education, this is where I want to be. Because the strategic plan is ambitious. First of all, how many of us feel like they could say that they're the lead in your business and you want to proclaim it? Well, that's what the university is doing with Dr. Heather Wilson's leadership. We're proclaiming that we're America's leading Hispanic majority university. We're the lead. And no, it's not Arlington. It's, you know, 600 miles away from the border, or San Antonio, that's 400 miles away from the border, or other universities. And what I find really interesting is that at times she was told, Dr. Natalicio, you're doing a great job, but why do you have to describe us as a Hispanic serving university? And so 30 years later, America has changed so much that they understand what it means to have diversity in our community and the importance of diversity. In the High Hopes years, before the 90s, she went out to the business community in El Paso and frankly asked people, you know, who's going to buy your cars? Who's going to buy your homes? Who's going to have money in your banks? Who's going to shop at Walmart? You know, if we don't educate these people, if we don't educate El Paso, if we don't educate ourselves, we're not going to have an economic future. And so we've come a long way as a community and as a nation. And certainly I think Dr. Wilson's positioning is very, very important. So more things about UTEP today. We have a new degree in aeronautical engineering and aerospace. We have a $70 million structure to be built on the corner of Rim Road and Hawthorne, dedicated to aeronautical engineering. Of course, it helps when your president is the former Secretary of the Air Force, right? Every other week, Marty and I know this, we have a 4-star, a 3-star, a 2-star, 1-star general visiting UTEP. All the Space Force people, the people that are designing the new military force to live up there and to defend us as a country from up there, they came to campus to sign agreements with the UT system and UTEP and other partners to get the engineers. So maybe we weren't so far off in 2001 when we were looking for more Dannies, right? Maybe they're not astronauts anymore, but they're engineers that are going to work up there. And certainly those that are paying to go to space, many of them are being supported by UTEP engineers who are creating the rocket engines to get us off the ground. So that's an area. This may surprise you. We have 800 plus doctoral students, over 100 doctoral students. Jim and I will remember, we could count the number of doctoral students in geology on this hand, and maybe this hand. We've gone from 1 PhD to 23, and we have another proposal for a doctoral degree in sociology that will probably be our 24th. The health science program has just exploded. 30% of our students have some interest either in health science programs like pharmacy, nursing, occupational therapy, physical therapy, public health, all of the health science areas. We don't know the final count yet. We do expect a decrease in enrollment because of COVID and people stopping out. But when we pre-COVID, we were 25,000. When I was recruiting, I was hoping to get to 15. So we've grown 10,000 plus, and majority of those students are not coming in from other places. They're coming from right here, from down the street, from Canutillo to Tornillo. So on the academic area, I know that some of you are interested in how UTEP is doing funding wise. From a development standpoint, our development officers are reporting the third highest development year. 750 million is recorded this year. That's as of August, with pledges and money in the coffers. Research, where are we? Well, we don't have the final numbers yet, but we're projected to be around that 105 again. At the end of, or the start of August, we were at 87 million compared to 55 million the previous year. So again, we don't have the final numbers, but we're still at that $100 million range. This stat I want to share with you, and I didn't want to have too many slides up here because I thought I'll just go on and on. But when you look at retention, the retention rate of UTEP students, and we are an open access university. You need to be a graduate of a Texas high school to have a chance at UTEP. And open admission, 67% of our students progress to the next year. That's a 1-year retention rate, 67. Schools that are minimal selective, they have a higher admission standard than an open admission university like we are, have slightly higher, 70%. Those that are mid-range selective, they have more selection, whether they're state or public, they have about a 75% rate of retention from 1 year to the next. The most selective, we're talking about the schools that are selecting only the 2%, 3% at most of each graduating class, their percentage is 87. So we're doing well. We're doing well. Like all of you, your parents taught you to work. Your parents taught you to roll up your sleeves, to study hard. Mijito, mijita, son, daughter, if you work hard, someone will notice. Someone will help you. You'll progress. The American dream has always been to do better than our parents, right? Always, we knew how hard our parents worked. We wanted to work as hard, but maybe not doing the same thing they did. And so that dream is very much alive at UTEP, and the retention rate, I think, shows that. Okay, what else can I tell you? Last year's graduating class, Mari and our staff helped put together, I think it was like 4,000 graduates out of three semesters, 4 semesters in the Sun Bowl for the May graduation. There were 4,004 who earned degrees in 2021. 83% of them graduated in 6 years or less. 83%, 6 years or less. 52% graduated in 4 years or less. 46% began as transfer students. And I cannot say enough about the great job that EPCC is doing. You know, and I know we all know we're going to get an increase in taxes because of EPCC and the public schools. But are they paying off? The answer is yes. They are doing extremely well. And students are graduating and moving on to college or into the workforce. 46% of UTEP students began as transfer students, and many of them are high school equivalency graduates, you know, the early college, high school graduates. Many of them come in as 18-year-olds with an associate's degree already. They're finishing their UTEP degree before they're 20 and finishing their master's with the Pell Grant at 22. So really pushing that. 74% receive a Pell Grant. So 74, 3 out of 4 students walking around UTEP, you know, are considered some of the lowest income students in America. But their success rate is, well, you heard it. You know, they're doing very well. 84% are Hispanic. 84% of El Paso is Hispanic. So we are a mirror of this community. And this is going to surprise us, I think pleasantly. About 30% of our students are STEM-based students. Engineering, computer science, chemistry, biology, all the STEM-based. And when you add on top of that, another 30% or so who are health science. So 75% of our student body is in the high demand fields. It doesn't mean that we don't have other areas. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot. Moving on to the next slide, if you don't mind, please. I just simply wanted to remind you of a couple things that she used to say. Dream big. She told our students, whatever your dream is, it's not big enough. Dream bigger. And she always loved to say, no one does it alone. You know, she didn't receive all these accolades and awards and, you know, top 50 in the country and top 100 in the country and recognitions all over the world because it was her. It was because of us. So she said, do not forget that no one does it alone. The last thing I want to tell you is that we have a remembrance for her. We have a celebration of her life on the 24th, which is Sunday. It'll be at 6 o'clock in Centennial Park. And we do have special areas for people who need special accommodations and are special friends. So I invite you to contact our office. We're responsible for some of that to help you get the proper parking that you need and proper seating in the special recognition area. So my closing thoughts are just thank you. And as she always used to say, go Mike.
Questions? Any questions?
You had said that a certain